Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another AP World History reading. Today, we are going to be reading from Chapter 9.2, Technological Advancements and Limitations - Disease. Well, last time I checked, that's a little bit upsetting, but let's advance on through the chapter, and let's not have any limitations holding us back further. Quote, "We live in a world fraught with risk from new pandemics. Fortunately, we also now live in an era with the tools to build a global immune system." End quote. Nathan Wolfe, virologist, born 1970. Essential question. How many environmental factors affected human populations ever since 1900? As virus specialist Nathan Wolfe pointed out, progress in science and medicine, combined with government-run public health measures, drastically reduced illnesses and deaths from many diseases after 1900. These included pandemics, epidemic diseases that spread across national borders. The disease smallpox, for example, had plagued the ancient Egyptians and devastated the native population of the Americas and Australia. As recently as the 1960s, it killed millions of people each year. However, the World Health Organization, WHO, conducted a global vaccination campaign to wipe out the disease. In 1979, scientists declared success. Smallpox had been eliminated from the planet, except for the culture kept alive at the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. Other diseases persisted, especially those related to poverty, including malaria, tuberculosis, and cholera. New epidemics also emerged, such as deadly strands of the flu, HIV/AIDS, and Ebola. Other conditions, such as heart disease and Alzheimer's, became more common as people began living longer. Each medical problem spurred even more technological and medical advances to try to combat it. Disease and poverty. Even when cures exist, some diseases persist because the conditions of poverty are contributing factors. Poor housing or working conditions, contaminated water, and lack of access to healthcare are commonplace among populations with low incomes, and they all contribute to the spread of disease. Malaria. A parasitic disease spread by mosquitoes in tropical areas. Malaria killed more than 600,000 people each year in the early 21st century. Most of these were young African children. The International Non-Governmental Organization, NGO, Doctors Without Borders, treated about 1.7 million annually. Experts developed preventive approaches such as distributing mosquito nets treated with an insecticide as covered during sleep. However, people can still become infected during waking hours. A vaccine for malaria has been in development for many years, but one that is effective in most cases is still in trials. Nonetheless, progress has been made. In 2019, the World Health Organization certified Algeria and Argentina as malaria-free. The organization cautioned, however, that some types of mosquitoes were becoming resistant to insecticides. Tuberculosis. Another disease associated with poverty is tuberculosis, or TB, an airborne infection that spreads through coughs and sneezes and affects the lungs. Before 1946, no effective drug treatment was available for this deadly disease. Then a cure was developed involving antibiotics and a long period of rest. In countries where TB is common, vaccines were administered to children. In the early 21st century, a strain of tuberculosis resistant to the usual antibiotics appeared. The number of infected patients increased, especially in prisons, where people live in close quarters. The WHO began a worldwide campaign against tuberculosis in the 2010s. Cholera. A bacterial disease that spreads through contaminated water. Cholera causes about 95,000 deaths per year. Like tuberculosis and malaria, cholera affects mainly poor people in developing countries. Methods to counter cholera include boiling or chlorinating drinking water and washing hands. Although cholera vaccines are available, they do not reduce the need to follow these preventive measures. A severe cholera infection can kill within a few hours, but quickly rehydrating an exposed person can effectively eliminate the risk of death. And as you can see by this chart here, it is the top 10 causes of deaths in low-income countries in 2016, along with death rate per 100,000 people. As you can see here, there is the UNG infections, pneumonia, etc. And then you can see there's diarrhea, heart disease, HIV/AIDS, stroke, malaria, tuberculosis, complications before death and before birth, and then complications during birth, and then road injury, as well as the cause groups. And this source states Global Health Estimates 2016, death by cause, age, sex, by country, and by region. 2000 to 2016. Geneva World Health Organization 2018. World Bank list of economies. June 2017. Washington D.C. The World Bank Group 2017. And then with a website listed beneath. And then there's another chart also shown with top 10 causes of deaths in upper middle income countries in 2016, having the same causes, same cause group, and a different and actually the same source. Polio. Another disease caused by water contaminated by a virus transmitted in fecal matter. Polio once infected 100,000 new people per year. It could result in paralysis and sometimes death. The world cheered when an American researcher, Jonas Salk, announced on April 12, 1955, that an injectable vaccine against polio had proven effective. 6 years later, an oral vaccine developed by Albert Sabin became available. Vaccines became the centerpiece of a global public health campaign to eliminate polio. A joint effort by governments, private organizations, and the United Nations agencies began in 1988. In less than 30 years, polio was eliminated in all but a few countries. In places where it still exists, such as Pakistan and Afghanistan, war makes administering the vaccine difficult. Political unrest and religious fundamentalism make people fearful of programs advocated by outsiders. Still, the success of the campaign showed that coordinated global efforts could help global problems. Emerging epidemics. Some diseases have emerged that caused major social disruption. In the fall of 1918, as World War I was drawing to a close, a new fight erupted. The issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association, published on December 12, 1918, described the battle this way. Medical science for 4.5 years devoted itself to putting men on the firing line and keeping them there. Now, it must turn with its whole might to combating the greatest enemy of all, infectious disease. In fact, more soldiers died from the flu than won battle. 1/4 of all Americans and 1/5 of the world's population became infected with this particular virulent strain of the flu, which killed 20 million people worldwide. Its victims tended to be between the ages of 20 and 40. The effects of the flu were so disastrous that the longevity in the United States fell by 10 years. More people died from the flu in 1918 to 1919 than had died in 4 years of the bubonic plague, 1347 to 1351. Like the plague, the flu spread along trade routes and with military troops. HIV/AIDS. Another disease outbreak causing social disruption occurred between 1981 and 2014. Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS, which is caused by the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, killed more than 25 million people around the world. HIV weakens the immune system, so people more easily succumb to other illnesses. The virus is contracted through the exchange of bodily fluids, usually through unprotected sex, blood transfusions, or sharing intravenous needles. Funding for the research on the disease, which was associated in its early days with homosexual men and drug addicts, was difficult to come by, and a high percent of its first victims died. By the mid 1990s, however, medical researchers had developed ways to treat the disease, but not to cure it. Antiretroviral drugs could stop HIV from weakening the immune system, thus allowing a patient to live with the virus for many years. However, the drugs were very expensive, so access to treatment was difficult, particularly for patients in poor countries. Brazil is a notable exception. In 1996, it established a policy of providing free antiretroviral drugs to any person who needed them. Deaths have declined dramatically, and the program has actually saved the government money by lowering the number of hospitalizations, medical leaves, and early retirements. After 2000, the WHO, the United States government, and private groups increased funding for AIDS prevention and treatment, but the disease remains a serious problem. In 2018, about 40 million people globally were living with HIV, the majority in developing countries or low-income neighborhoods of developed countries. Each week, more than 600 young women between the ages of 15 and 24 infected with HIV, and many lack access to health care. Ebola. Another recent and frightening epidemic is Ebola. Discovered in the Congo of 1976, Ebola is a deadly disease caused by a virus that infects the African fruit bat, humans, and other primates. Humans get the virus from exposure to fluids of infected people or animals. The disease causes extensive bleeding, organ failure, and for the majority of infected people, death. In 2014, a massive outbreak in West Africa caused fear around the world. However, a coordinated, intensive public health effort coordinated and then ended the outbreak. As with polio, countries demonstrated their ability to work together to confront the danger. The WHO took a leading role in this public health response, issuing emergency warnings and implementing a road map for handling the outbreaks. Diseases associated with longevity. Heart disease. As longevity increases, and diseases that typically do not develop until later in life begin to assert themselves. Heart disease, for example, is associated with lifestyle, genetics, and increased longevity. One of the major discoveries in fighting heart disease was the heart transplant, first performed by the South African Christian Bard in 1967. Robert Jarvik led a team that designed an artificial heart, used a temporary device while the patient waited for a compatible human heart. Other researchers developed less invasive procedures, replacing valves, installing stents in arteries, replacing the vessels leading to the heart, and developing medications to reduce blood conditions that led to heart disease. In the 2000s, people with heart disease lived longer than similarly affected people did in the 1970s. Alzheimer's disease. As people lived longer, a form of dementia known as Alzheimer's disease that affects elderly and some middle-aged people also began an increasing concern. Alzheimer's patients progressively lose their memory, eventually leading to a stage in which they do not recognize their loved ones. Since the disease undermines bodily functions, it leads to death. Researchers continue to search for a cure. Key terms by theme. Environment, epidemics. Pandemic, smallpox, malaria, Doctors Without Borders, tuberculosis, cholera, smallpox, Jonas Salk, Albert Sabin, polio, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, Ebola, society, disease, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. Technology, medical advances. Antiretroviral drugs. Heart transplant. Christian Barnard. Robert Jarvik. Artificial heart. And, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that is going to conclude today's episode of Reading Aloud with 9.2. However, in my opinion, I'm going to dive a little bit into the essential question. There were certainly a lot of environmental factors that were pointed out, like, for example, poverty in less sanitary conditions, which should definitely be kept in mind as a major big idea of this chapter, that if everyone was in a bad situation, like let's say they weren't in the cleanest place, they were more likely exposed to certain diseases and other issues. Keep that in mind when you're taking a look back at this chapter or history. Anyways, that's going to do it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Now, please remember that if you like the video, hit the subscribe button, and then hit the notification bell if you want to stay up to date on when I post more content. And sorry for my absolute butchering of pronunciations once again. However, remember, ladies and gentlemen, that we are staying also that you can stay tuned for episode 9.3 coming up right in a few minutes. Now remember, like the video, subscribe, and I hope you stay safe, stay happy, and stay entertained.